It all started with a grill, 2 cans of beer, and a portable speaker. It was Saturday, late afternoon, and I was in my backyard listening to some upbeat jazz while grilling a steak the size of my grudge against HOA meetings. The sound wasn't loud, nothing to stop anyone from hearing their own thoughts. But the madam on the other side of the fence thought she was in front of a festival stage. The woman appeared at the gate with an expression that mixed despair and disgust, as if she had just smelled real food for the first time. She had that useless clipboard under her arm and a cell phone secretly recording, as if she were a detective on a secret mission to save the morals and good manners of the neighborhood. She didn't say, "Good afternoon." She didn't ask, "Please." She didn't ask anything. He just yelled, "You're violating the HOA's hearing code of conduct." At the time, I thought it was a joke. Hearing code of conduct? Does that exist now? That's when she pulled a decibel meter out of her pocket, one of those sold for $20 on the internet, and started pointing it at my stereo with an award-winning scientist pose. The display flashed random numbers that she swore were proof of constant noise disturbance. I stared at it in disbelief that someone had woken up in the morning, put on a pair of starched beige pants, and thought, "Today, I'm going to measure the sound of the neighbor's barbecue." She left grumbling that she was going to file a formal complaint. It wasn't even 2 days before a letter printed with the HOA logo arrived, signed by herself, demanding that I attend a special meeting of the disciplinary committee. It was a meeting about noise, at 6 in the morning, on a Monday. That's when I realized this was personal. It wasn't about sound or jazz. It was about control. It was about her feeling entitled to control everything and everyone, including the volume of my joy. Because, let's be honest, what bothered that woman the most wasn't the sound of the music. It was the sound of other people's freedom. Happy people annoy those who only know how to live in bitterness. I went to that meeting for pure fun. I walked into the HOA room, the one with the plastic table and the whiteboard full of bizarre rules written in red marker, and saw that she was already there, all set up, with the papers organized as if she were defending a murder case. She looked at me like a criminal. She said that I was a threat to the community's noise and that she was filing a formal suit for disturbing the peace. The pinnacle was when she presented a series of proofs, distorted recordings, spreadsheets with the times of the supposed noises, even a graph with peak decibels during Saturday lunchtime. The woman made a PowerPoint with transitions and everything. It was the most pathetic attempt to turn a speaker into a biological weapon. The cherry on top of the madness came when she handed over a summons, made of recycled paper, printed at home, saying she would take me to the local civil court for repeated auditory antisocial behavior. I held in my laughter with all the strength in my being. I signed the receipt for the summons with a pen that flashed LED lights and walked away thinking, if she wanted to take this to court, great. She just forgot one delicious detail. The district judge was my brother, a guy who grew up with me listening to heavy rock, who slept with a noisy fan in his room, and who lost half his hearing at an open bar party in the 90s. A man who abhors people who try to turn a complaint into a lawsuit. Of course, I didn't say anything. I waited for the process to go smoothly. I let her spend money on a lawyer, on color printing, on more HOA meetings where she read the hearing crimes of the month. She was so confident that she had even told the neighborhood group that I would be fined and that a legal precedent would be set to protect the peace of the community. Her ego grew so big that you could see it from around the corner. Meanwhile, I just watched, with a headset, of course. When the hearing date arrived, I went to court with a discreet smile and an empty briefcase. I didn't need any evidence, because everything she had prepared was going to fall apart with a single sentence. "Your Honor, good to see you." But before that, there would still be the show. The moment when she would stand up all pompous, open the papers with dramatic gestures, and start repeating that same crazy speech about home noise pollution. And that's exactly what happened. The court building was only 20 minutes away, but the walk there was like going to an exclusive comedy show. The kind of thing you can't afford to pay for, because the universe serves it up on a platter when stupidity meets an inflated ego. And that's what happened. I arrived 10 minutes before the hearing, put on a dress shirt just to maintain the decency of the occasion, and went with a calm that only those who know the script of the play can have. In the waiting room, she was sitting upright, holding a folder with colored labels, probably separating the files by type of noise offense. She looked like she expected to be carried out of there on the shoulders of her neighbors, like an auditory heroine. She didn't greet me, just gave me that look of someone who had already won. Because in her little world, all she had to do was point her finger, and the world would obey. The clock struck 10:30, and the assistant announced, "Case number 7394, civil hearing for disturbing the peace." The woman jumped to her feet, as if she'd been called to the stage for an award, and walked forward with the stiff gait of someone who has memorized every step. I got in at the back, holding back my laughter, and when the door to the courtroom opened, there he was, the judge in the case, sitting there looking bored, fiddling with his glasses. The same guy who once had his car towed because he forgot he'd parked in front of his own garage. My older brother. He looked at the papers on the table, saw my name, tilted his head slightly, and then her name. Ah, that name. His expression changed instantly. He gave me that crooked half-smile of someone who knew they were about to hear a tall tale. He kept it formal, of course, but I recognized the twinkle in his eye. This was fun, disguised as business. She started with everything. She went straight for the attack. She opened her briefcase, took out stapled papers, started quoting timetables, decibel levels, invented statistics. She showed a graph that looked like it had been taken from a heart rate app. It said that at 5:22 p.m. on a Saturday, the sound of my music reached 65 decibels, and that this exceeded the tolerable limit of coexistence, as if she had measured it with laboratory equipment and not with a $20 device bought online. But the climax of the show was when she put an audio on the speakerphone. It was a recording of my surround sound while I was barbecuing. In the background, you could clearly hear the sound of soft jazz, conversations with friends, and, to her dismay, the sound of her own dog barking as if it were narrating the soap opera. She paused the moment my laughter echoed, as if that were proof of the crime. She looked at the judge, her eyes shining, expecting applause, but all she got was a raised eyebrow and a, "Is that all?" He then asked to hear my side. I took a step forward, looked at her calmly, and spoke. "Your Honor, I believe that everything has already been demonstrated. The audio speaks for itself." The woman interrupted, saying that I was being ironic, that it was disrespectful to the authority of the HOA. It was at that moment that the judge straightened up in his chair, crossed his fingers on the papers, and said, with that dry tone he only uses when he loses his temper, "Ma'am, this is a court of law, not an extension of your neighborhood committee. Let's stay focused." The woman froze. She blinked, swallowed, but remained seated as if she still had a chance of turning the tide. Except that the trial had already been decided the minute the case fell into the right hands. Those recordings showed nothing more than a normal Saturday, in a normal house, with the noise of life. And she knew it. But the problem with obsession is that it doesn't listen. It just screams. The judge took a deep breath, looked at the documents, and read slowly. There are not enough elements to consider the occurrence of a disturbance of the peace in the case presented. The volume of sound recorded is compatible with ordinary domestic activities. Case dismissed. That was it. That was it. One stamp, one sentence, and her colorful paper castle collapsed onto the floor of reality. But it didn't end there. He added that the HOA's insistence on judicializing trivial conflicts could be considered an abuse of rights, and that more actions of this kind could lead to punishments for the committee. A direct, dry, cold, and completely necessary warning. She didn't reply. She got up slowly, picked up her briefcase, turned her back, and left like someone who had lost her throne. Outside, in the parking lot, I leaned against the car and took a deep breath. Not because of the victory, but for the delight it is to see someone's inflated ego deflated with class, without having to raise my voice, without having to make a fuss, just with the facts themselves, and the exact noise that the truth makes when it imposes itself, none. Most people would have left that courtroom with their heads down and their tails between their legs, accepting defeat as a warning to stop meddling where they don't belong. But not that woman. She left with her pose intact, as if she had won an imaginary war. Her face showed neither shame nor regret. It was pure recalcitrance embedded in stubbornness. It was written on her forehead, "It's not over yet." The next day, like someone who had recharged her battery overnight, she pasted a new notice on the mural in the central square. HOA announcement, updating the code of sound coexistence. A long text, badly diagrammed, full of long sentences and invented words, like limit of collective auditory harmony. A veritable treatise on what she thought was noise, disguised as official regulation. It even had a chart with times when absolute silence should be respected, including Sunday morning and Tuesday afternoon. Because apparently, the sound of banging pots at 2 p.m. bothered the gods of peace. But that wasn't all. It also included a table with recommended residential noise levels based on who knows what collective delusion. It said that conversations should be kept moderate, that frequent barking should be controlled with training, and that sounds such as loud laughter or exaggerated coughing could be grounds for warning. It was like living in a sorority of neurotic librarians. The most unbelievable thing? She was still trying to push it through as law. The same day, I sent the scanned document to my brother, the judge, just to make him laugh. His reply came in audio, a 30-second laugh, followed by a, "That deserves to be a comedy booklet," because that's what it was. The woman couldn't accept losing. She needed to regain control, if only by creating her own reality, where she could be the queen of order and eternal silence. But the game had changed. The court decision not only invalidated her complaint, but also raised alarm bells in the community. Neighbors, previously submissive or indifferent, began to realize that she had no real power, that the HOA's rules only worked up to the point where someone legally challenged them. Reports began to come in, conversations at the gate, indignant people. One lady commented that she had already been warned because she used a blender before 8 in the morning. A young man said he had received a notice because the sound of his daughter's video game was invading the neighborhood's airspace. It was absurdity on top of absurdity. And as every cardboard empire begins to crumble at the base, the board members themselves began to distance themselves from it. First came the passive-aggressive messages. The HOA's decision doesn't necessarily represent all its members. Or, "We're reviewing the internal communication criteria." Then they disappeared from the meetings. And shortly after, that came the official request for the collective resignation of 3 board members. The reason? Conflict of principles. She tried to hold it together, but her isolation was evident. Now she appeared alone at meetings, speaking to empty chairs and slides that no one was watching. She still wore that cream-colored blazer that screamed pretension and held her briefcase as if it were the Constitution. But inside, it was just her and the echo of her own voice. The end point of this tomfoolery came with a new notice that appeared on the wall. Residents interested in reformulating the current HOA structure are invited to attend an open meeting. Her name wasn't on the notice. It was the first communication from the association in years that wasn't signed by her. It was the beginning of the end. And to put salt on the wound, the new provisional committee decided to hold an event in the neighborhood, a community picnic, with music, and I was invited to be in charge of the sound. I happily prepared a playlist. Good music, pleasant volume, a light atmosphere. On the day of the event, I set up the speaker in the center of the square, placed the chairs and arranged the tables. People arrived little by little, first with trepidation, then with smiles. Children playing, dogs running around, neighbors exchanging recipes. A real neighborhood atmosphere. She showed up. Of course she did. She wasn't going to let an event with music go unnoticed. She stood at a distance, arms folded, watching like someone assessing the enemy. But she didn't say anything. For the first time in months, she was silent. She had no clipboard, no flyer, no decibel meter. Just that withering look of someone who knows she's lost her throne and no longer has a kingdom to rule. The community's noise was louder than any meter could register, and her silence, for the first time, was music. The picnic was just the beginning of the downfall. What seemed like a simple community event ended up becoming a kind of collective exorcism ritual. Only instead of priests, we had residents with pie and karaoke. It was as if the whole neighborhood was cleansing itself of the energies of months of oppression, of ludicrous warnings, of meetings in which women read out rules as if they were interpreting sacred clauses. The difference was that this time nobody had to ask permission to laugh, sing, or talk. The fear had gone along with her prestige. In the days that followed, she practically disappeared from the neighborhood's public life. The house had its windows closed, the mailbox empty, and the mural in the square, once monopolized by posters about silence, standardized pruning of bushes, and absurd prohibitions, was now used to advertise fairs, outdoor yoga classes, and a dominoes championship that she would probably have banned for risk of noisy agglomeration. But the real blowback wasn't given out loud. It was given quietly, in the way that bothered people like her the most, with indifference. People stopped replying to her emails. They ignored the newsletters she was still trying to distribute under their doors. The remaining councilors officially dissolved the committee she led and created a new management structure for the neighborhood, with collective decisions and a focus on real coexistence rather than fabricated punishment. She tried to resist. She sent a letter to the new committee, saying that her experience with noise management could be useful. The reply was read out in the assembly and drew discreet laughter. "We thank you for your historic contribution, but at the moment, we are looking for a less interventionist approach." That was the final blow. At this point, even those who were afraid of her began to speak out. It came to light that she had already tried to stop a neighbor from installing an awning because it creates irregular shade, that she had picked on a 78-year-old woman for playing AM radio in her backyard, and that she wrote down other people's walking times as if the sound of footsteps could offend the sacred silence of the neighborhood. The most curious thing is that, after everything, she continued to live there. She didn't move house, she didn't leave, she didn't sell anything, she just got smaller. Her pride withered, her posture stiffened, the tone of her voice disappeared. He walked past his neighbors looking at the ground, pretending not to hear the laughter, the music, the barking. He no longer threatened anyone with leaflets or invented noise departments. She was a shadow of her former self, wandering the streets where no one feared her bulletins anymore. Months later, she turned up at the local supermarket. She was thinner, carrying a trolley with only half a dozen things in it. She met my mother in the checkout line. She tried to force a polite smile and said, "Things seem to be busier around here." My mother, who never missed a chance to drop a pearl, replied without blinking, "Yes, dear, now we live. Before, we just whispered." The cashier laughed a little. She paid in silence and left with her shoulders slumped. She had lost the war she herself had invented. She tried to govern with letterhead and tape, and ended up buried by her own overzealousness. The new HOA, now with a different name, no lifetime positions, no clipboards, has become an example of how to recover a neighborhood from the clutches of a domestic dictatorship. Assemblies became chats, community events made a strong comeback, and residents who used to walk on eggshells now danced on the sidewalk. Literally, even my brother, the judge, came to visit me one day. We sat in the backyard, beer cold, music on in moderation, the usual jazz. He looked around, saw the light atmosphere, the kids playing in the square and said, "Funny how a noise lawsuit turned into a noise revolution." I raised my glass, toasting the sound of freedom. The woman who tried to impose absolute silence was now just a memory. And the most ironic thing, she became a joke in the very environment she tried to control. There was no need for scandalous revenge. All it took was for everyone to stop listening, and her silence finally made sense. If you like this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.